Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. This is Steve Sapojowski, publisher of BayouBuzz.com. And today we're going to be talking, this afternoon, we're going to be talking national legal issues and politics a little bit, if you want to call it politics. And we're going to be actually addressing the issue of potential presidential pardons of defendants in the Mueller investigation, possibly even the Cohen investigation, and whether or not the president would have any legal exposure. And today I have on our program Carolyn Fredrickson, who has been with us before. She's the president of the American Constitution Society, and that organization, along with CREW, has come up with a report in terms of what we can expect. CREW is the Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington. So good afternoon, Carolyn. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thanks. It's great to be on the show again.
Well, thank you so much. Why don't you give us a little bit background once again about what your organization is?
Absolutely. We're a network of lawyers, law students, academics, judges, and elected officials, and people who care about the Constitution, who believe that the law should be a force for good in the lives of all people. We work to achieve positive change by promoting high-impact ideas and networking people who want to debate and discuss issues in the news and in law.
Okay. And so what prompted y'all to come up with this particular report?
Well, you know, one of the goals of this project that we have with CREW is to explain to the public what's going on and what are the legal issues in play behind the Mueller investigation. It seemed to us that, that when a special counsel and prosecutors generally can't go out and hold press conferences and talk about their work, they really need to just figure out, whether a law has been broken and whether charges need to be filed. So we thought it would be a good idea, because there's such important questions here. I mean, we do need to know, did a foreign power interfere in our elections? Were laws broken? And so we wanted to explain a little bit about what were some of the questions that Mr. Mueller's trying to answer. And so in this context, it's, the president obviously has a very broad pardon power. How would it work to affect the investigation? Could he actually cut it off? Could he protect himself by using the pardon power? So what we've done is explain, first of all, what the pardon power is, and then what it does and doesn't cover, and how by using the pardon power itself, it might actually expose the president to even further legal liability if it was used in such a way as to obstruct justice. So that's what the report has done, and I'm happy to elaborate on each of those pieces. But
Sure.
Again, the main focus was to really try and explain to the public, what's going on and what is he looking at. So here's sort of one basic element. The president's pardon power, as expansive as it is, he cannot pardon something that's a crime at the state level. The president's power is only commensurate with federal criminal liability. And so the states could continue, if there were legal violations under state law, could continue to prosecute. There is something called double jeopardy in our law, which means you can't be prosecuted twice for the same crime. But double jeopardy doesn't mean that the state, even if the state has a similar type of criminal law, doesn't mean that if the president were to pardon somebody for a violation under federal law, it doesn't prohibit, even for the same type of claim. Most states will believe that that claim can be prosecuted under state law, even if it's very similar to the federal law. So, so there's two levels of this. One is, you can't pardon for state crime, and double jeopardy doesn't prohibit state prosecution, even if the pardon was for a federal crime of a very similar nature.
Okay, so that's part one. Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay. Let me ask you this. How concerned are you, before we go into the other ones, how concerned are you that the president may pardon either the Mueller or the Cohen case? And are we making too much out of it?
Well, it's a concern. I think, uh, one of the big questions involved in this investigation is whether there's been obstruction of justice. And so, and this is the second part of the report, but to look into whether or not, how a pardon could actually be evidence of obstruction of justice. In this case, whether it might in fact be used by Mr. Mueller to further substantiate claims of obstruction of justice. So that's sort of the background why this is an important conversation. The president recently pardoned Scooter Libby.
Right.
So many people took that as a signal to people who've been indicted already by Mr. Mueller or are being interviewed by Mr. Mueller, that the president might pardon them if it would be helpful to them and to him. So Scooter Libby was a Bush lawyer who was involved with outing a CIA agent, Victoria Plame, and interfering with her ability to do her job. He was not pardoned by President Bush, which was interesting. He didn't suffer terrible legal distress. The president did help him out, but didn't pardon him. It's interesting that at this point in time, this president, President Trump, decides to pardon Scooter Libby. So I think that was, the backdrop is he's certainly aware of the pardon power. He reached out to somebody who was a kind of a fixer lawyer for in the Bush administration, and sent that signal. So I think we wanted to make sure that people understood, and that others understood, beyond the general public, but other people who might be thinking about the pardon power very specifically and how it might apply, to dissuade people from thinking that it was a silver bullet for the president to, I was going to say, have a get out of jail free card, but more just to say that the president could not completely escape potential liability, nor could the people who are pardoned, because the pardon power can't extend to state crimes, and the state attorneys general are quite invigorated right now, and I think would want to ensure that if there are laws that have been broken at the state level, that there is a prosecution at the state level.
Okay, so the first part was presidential pardons do not cover state prosecution. The second part is what?
Well, the second part is this double jeopardy issue.
Mm-hmm.
People are familiar with that, but this is what the paper explains, is that double jeopardy does not mean that if you get pardoned for, say, a money laundering crime, or tax evasion crime, or lying to investigators or something like that, and you receive a pardon. If there's an equivalent crime under state law, in most states, you can still be prosecuted. So, it's the dual sovereign doctrine. I mean, states are their own sovereign under our federalism structure. So there are a few states that have more limited ability to prosecute. That is, their double jeopardy protections would say, if our state law is very much the same, or tracks the federal law, then double jeopardy applies, and so we can't prosecute. But even there are where there's any distinction between the state law and the federal law, even those few states that have that kind of expanded double jeopardy protection, any deviation from the federal law will most likely allow a prosecution. So it's simply to say that the protection of the pardon power is limited. And there's the states are actually where most criminal law is made. Sort of more traditionally, the states were where prosecutions happen, and the federal criminal law jurisdiction has expanded over the past decades quite a bit. But traditionally, the states were where criminal law was more of the central focus. So I think what we're just trying to explain to people is that there's more to this story. That's it's not the end. It's really just a beginning if there are pardons, and and there's a civil law component here too. And what I think is important for people who might be hoping for a pardon is that it can be inferred from a pardon that someone is guilty. So in the civil context, where you have civil asset forfeiture or other types of civil litigation that might come from the activities, they might actually be putting themselves more at risk because they've been pardoned, because there's an assumption that they are actually guilty.
No, so does a person have to accept the pardon?
It's not really discretionary. I've never heard of the ability to turn down a pardon.
Right. But if there are civil liabilities that could be attached, I'm just wondering whether or not, of course, the civil liability could attach regardless.
Well, absolutely, but it would simply suggest that in a civil case, it can be seen. Certain courts have found that the acceptance of a pardon is evidence of guilt. So I guess, yes, I suppose they could reject it, but it's sort of unheard of. But then they would have to have some kind of an established record of rejecting of the pardon, and then they would be subject to federal prosecution. So it's a hard to imagine, but it's sort of damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, changing gears for a second, do y'all have any opinion at all in terms of who might be pardoned if you were to pardon? Is that something that y'all discussed?
Well, it's this paper is meant to be a broader legal paper to explain these issues, but obviously the people who are most in the news are those who might be pardoned. So Paul Manafort, Michael Cohen, and there has been on and off discussion of if things move further with anyone in the president's family, they would be, people he might think of pardoning. But this is really meant to be a legal background paper for people who are interested in understanding what the law is and why a pardon is of a limited utility to the president.
Okay. Now, there is a third and fourth part.
Well, we talk about the civil liability component.
Okay.
I'm just saying there are a few points here. It's not a multi-part report, but more that
Right.
there are. There's the main point, which is federal and state are different sovereigns, and a pardon can't pardon for a state crime. Double jeopardy doesn't apply when there are any differences between the state and federal law, or even where they're the same. In most states, it's an entirely separate prosecution under state law, even if it's the same charge under federal law. And then there's the issue that, and even if there is a pardon, it doesn't apply to civil law. And then the final piece is that a pardon that is meant to obstruct the investigation is further evidence of obstruction of justice. And it is, it was a piece of the articles of impeachment against President Nixon that he the possibility of pardons as a way to undermine an investigation.
So that's really interesting that it could be part of a obstruction of justice claim. I mean, is that an absolute in terms of, or is just another piece of evidence?
It's evidence. It's evidence. You know, it's going to be any case that's brought on obstruction of justice is going to turn on the evidence, and the more evidence you have, the stronger the cases. But certainly, any background that shows that the idea of the pardon was to make it so that the person who's been pardoned is not going to talk to the investigators. Doesn't, one of the elements of what a prosecutor is going to do is to talk to somebody and see if that person will give evidence against somebody else, right? So a pardon kind of takes that piece away, but if it's done explicitly or overtly, there's evidence of it, it can become part of a charge of obstruction of justice.
Okay, so I'm just looking at some of my notes here, and I'm just wondering, you mentioned Richard Nixon and the issue of abuse of power. So a pardon could actually constitute an impeachable offense in terms of abuse of power, even though he's got a constitutional right?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, please explain that, please.
Well, so, it's obstruction of justice is generally the obstruction of justice can be made up of legal actions. Somebody can do something that's legal, but if the objective of that act is to thwart a law enforcement investigation, it itself can become a piece of an obstruction of justice charge. And the same is true with the pardon power. Even if it's legal, constitutional to pardon somebody, if the pardon is done with the objective of thwarting an investigation, it itself can become part of a obstruction of justice claim, or, as you mentioned, it could be the basis for impeachment.
Interesting. So today actually was a pretty big day in the news. I don't know if you want to discuss any of that, tie that in, but apparently the president's disclosure statement was released, and also
lots of news today.
Yeah, and also you had three different items that I know of. You have the release of the Don Jr. That meeting, and then you have a Senate Judiciary Committee, which has said that definitely that the Russians, in their opinion, has came out to win it for Donald Trump, favor Donald Trump, opposed to Hillary Clinton. So those are the three things that I know of. Yeah,
well, every minute that goes by, it feels like there's a new news.
Yeah.
Flash. We're living in that kind of an era. It's exhausting. But certainly today we know that that the president actually was aware of the payments that Michael Cohen made to Stormy Daniels. So that comes out now. He's to modify his financial disclosure. There are a lot of people who think that deserves a lot more investigation. Did the president actually? He signed those papers, and it's a crime to do so, knowing that they're false. So when he signed them last year, he clearly knew that there was a payment made by Michael Cohen, and that was not included in last year's financial disclosure. So there's that issue. That's I think a meaty point. The other piece is the documents, the interviews that were released that Donald Jr. had with the Senate Judiciary Committee, where he doesn't seem to recall whether or not he told his father about the meeting in the Trump Tower with the Russians. And then there's the Senate Intelligence Committee, which has come out strongly supporting ongoing investigation of the Russians, because they do believe that the Russians interfered with our election. As you said, put a finger on the scale for Donald Trump. So it's an onslaught of news. It's hard to keep track of. And again, this is why we're doing these research reports and putting out this information, because there is so much really important Really important developments that happen every day. And, you know, for those of us who really care about our democracy, who believe in rule of law, who think that nobody's above the law, we have to pay attention. And it's easy to turn the other way because we're just drowning in information that's coming out every day. You know, what's going on with the payments between, you know, this big Russian oil company that sold itself to a big slice to Qatar, the country in the Middle East, and that somehow that money came back and apparently is paying off potentially, went into Michael Cohen's slush fund to pay off Stormy Daniels. And, you know, it's hard to keep track of. We're trying to map it out. I encourage people to go to our website, which is acslaw.org. And look for the Mueller investigation. You'll find a lot of background materials there.
Okay, great.
About deeper reports on just obstruction of justice. What is it?
Yeah.
We look at the effort to undermine the Mueller campaign by questioning whether or not there are conflicts of interest. We explain why there aren't and go through the law there. There are a lot of shorter materials. Anyway, I highly commend it. It's very well done, and I think it's important for people, Republican or Democrat or independent or whatever. You know, we need to make sure that our government is abiding by the law.
Okay, I have two more points. One is a question, one is a statement. So I'm looking at, and actually this is something that I saw on television today, where the Donald Trump's acting head of ethics sent a letter to Rod Rosenstein.
Yes.
Stating that Michael Cohen's payment on behalf of Trump was a debt and may be relevant to any inquiry that
Exactly.
Rosenstein may be pursuing. I mean, that's basically a criminal referral.
Yes, it is. Exactly. It's very serious, as I said.
Yeah.
Did the president seems to admit that he knew, in fact, that there was a payment. It was a debt, and that he failed to disclose it last year and he signed the financial disclosure, and it says under penalty of law. It's a federal offense.
Right. And the last point was, is Alan Dershowitz a member of the organization?
I don't believe so.
Okay. I asked that because, I mean, as you know, there's just a lot of, he shocked a lot of people with his opinions. And so I was just kind of curious about that. So,
yes, he has for a while shocked a lot of people with his opinions.
Yeah. So listen, thank you so much. We will put this up, and right now it is up on Facebook and Twitter, and we will put up with excerpts and text transcript. And again, I really thank you. Please keep us informed. We enjoy getting the information from you all the time.
Absolutely. Anytime.
Thank you again. Thank you again. Take care of yourself. I'm going to push some buttons and say goodbye.
All righty.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, I'm gonna shut this in just 1 second. I'm recording it